welcome back to Operations Utopia. My guest this week is Paul Slater. Paul is the principal AI technologist at Adobe and formerly the founder of Billion Minds. And prior to that, worked for a long time in life sciences at Microsoft. He and I are on a podcast together called Humanity Working. And in this episode, we talked about his new role in AI at Adobe and what he's seen happening in this space, unfolding literally week by week. So Paul and I go way back, so we get into it pretty quickly. So enjoy my conversation with Paul Slater.
But then very rapidly, I was like, okay, so in order to do my job, I kind of need this like weird thing that is part CRM, part like CMS, content management system, like part newsfeed.
Yeah.
Right. And I also need to be so of course, for example, I need to know what these people are saying, right? And there's 70 plus of them, so that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
I need to know what they're saying. I need to know what's relevant to what's going on in the world. And then I need to guide what research Adobe is doing. And I need to write about all of that. And I need to make sure that the stuff we produce would appeal to those people. So I've got to like sort of gather it together in a news feed. I've also got to understand what they care about. And this is not, Salesforce ain't going to cut it, right?
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, what I need is like some kind of like CIA profiling thing on every single one of them. I need to pull the information in from all of them. I need to match that information. I need to understand what common themes are. I need to match that information. And I also need to understand that if we're producing something, of those 75, which ones would they appeal to most, right? And I need a system that tells me all of that. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I could tie this together with this. And then I was like, hang on, why don't I just build it, right?
Yeah.
And so the point is that I was able to build it from end to end in maybe 12 hours.
Jeez.
Right. So that's the point, right? I built something that is way more useful than any commercial software at all for my job in 12 hours. Right. And so that's and that is wildly different. And so the guidance that I'm giving people now is that even if you're not like very it's a bit like the guidance I was talking about with the guy with the push up against the wall, right? If you're not very technical, get a bit technical. If you are a bit technical, get a bit more technical. And then as you're doing it, start building these things that you need, because now what you can do is you can build systems that fit the things that you need to do and support the things you need to do like a glove, right? You can literally vibe code the perfect workflow support system for whatever job you have. And that is the thing that makes you the most valuable employee that you can be. And that's different to having a chat with Claude. And so that is what the next frontier is. And even for people who've never coded in their life, they can start doing it, because guess what? You can, even if you've never, if you've not even done Hello World in Claude Code yet, well, go to freaking Claude and ask Claude how to do Hello World. How do you do it? That's how I got started. I mean, I literally was like, I don't know what I'm doing in Claude Code. Well, let me help you. And then very, very rapidly, I built like a very highly functional first bit of code. Then I wanted to train myself properly in it. So rather than go online and find something on LinkedIn Learning, I Claude coded a program to teach me all of this, and so on and so forth. And then literally you're doing that learning by doing all of the time, and you can go from doing nothing to doing what I've been doing in, I don't know, a couple of weeks. So it's it is a lot easier than than people think it is to get up to speed. Now, all that said, right? Obviously, right? I used to write. I've written solution architecture books and patterns and architectural patterns and all that kind of stuff. So it's all there in me in some way, shape, or form, in a way that it's not in people who've got no experience with that in the background. And I'm aware of that, right?
Yeah.
But the actual like how to code bit, which is the biggest barrier for most people, that's gone.
Yeah.
Right? That's completely gone.
You have to know what you want, what you would want it to code. Knowing what you would want it to code.
Yes, you need to know what you want to. You need to know what you want it to do. Yeah. If you know what you want it to do, like actually know what you want it to do, and you can brainstorm with it, but you have to at the very least be able to think holistically enough to imagine the system that would solve the problems that you have. If you can do that, everything else is not that hard.
I wonder, though, how that individual support system, basically, that you've built to help you do your job better, the place where that it's not clicking for me, how that is going to shift quickly in a similar way when it comes to, and I don't want to just say like regulated systems because that's too broad of a brush, but like systems like the ones that we use in life sciences, for example, that are so well established. Like, I think maybe we've been asking the wrong question. It's not that there's a SaaS apocalypse and we're going to go away from those standard systems. If those foundational systems were still the foundation and good and used well, that would actually accelerate our ability to do what you're talking about, which is specialize our job. But like, I feel like we're not even at the baseline. Like so for example, you said, I need to go scrape to find out, to do a CIA deep dive on these 76 thought leaders, right? Well, that's the job. That it's going to do that for you. But if you had to say, let's say those thought leaders were all in the same database in a standard way, shape, or form, then see that doesn't work either, because then you wouldn't need what you built.
You wouldn't need, exactly. Yeah, and they're not.
Yeah. So we're at this weird place where we need it to be standardized. It's not. But can AI help us either leapfrog over the need to have that organized data?
Well, let's
not, right?
As they often say on these things, save it, because let's have that. Let's get.
Well, I'm recording already. I'm recording. I'm not editing. This is how we're getting into it, man.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the question again?
So the question is, how much can we count on these types of tools, and how soon can we count on these types of tools enabling us to leapfrog from your standard organizational CRM data governance thing to making it really useful because of AI? Because that we could do it, except we're going to be held to the old standard to show that we did it.
All right.
You know what I mean?
I get it. I do, yeah. So let me start by saying this. I think that how we build and design software is, or products even, right? How we build and design products is an artifact, not the way in which it actually should be done. I had this like I got to tell you, man, like just going through the processes that I've been going through over the course of the last month or so has caused me to have quite a lot of epiphanies about quite a lot of things. and one of the epiphanies that I had is, why is it that between 1990 the air, but let's say 1990. Between 1990 and today, the number of products, and I mean literally products, I mean everything from a bicycle to an app on your iPhone. If you were to look at the number of products that exist in the world, it hasn't just gone up by 20% or 30%, right? It is thousands and thousands of times more products than existed back then. Is that a reflection of the fact that we need all of these additional products? I don't think so. I think that's a reflection of the fact that we go through this process of going, okay, here's a problem. It's less expensive than it used to be for me to create a solution to this problem. And all I've got to do is be able to create the solution to the problem that I identify, and then do sales and marketing around that in order to provide a product so that I can connect the solution to the. So that's an artifact of sort of like the cost of getting solutions to market in the form of products. It doesn't answer that fundamental question as to whether we need all of those products, whether the world is a better place because those products exist, because every single one of those is something in isolation that is created. It's not answering a question about the aggregate. So if you sort of pull back and you say, okay, well, now let's look at the structure of products, right? Are they the best way of solving these world problems? No, because what happens is each time a product is built, you then solve for the little thing, and then you add a bit of functionality here, and add a bit of functionality here, and add a bit of functionality here, so that you can continue to sell the product, and you're increasing the value of the product. So in your world, for example, what that translates to is that if we think about the world as a whole in the aggregate, there is a relatively small amount of stuff that actually needs to be in centralized databases, highly regulated, highly controlled. And that relatively small amount of stuff must be like that. And then everything that is not included in that doesn't need to be that way at all, but is layered into these same products,
right,
in order for people to be able to say they provide value and all of that kind of stuff. And so what this sort of like epiphany of me gets is that, like, when I'm describing my thing about the thing that's part CRM and part something else and part something else and part something else, right? Is there a need for a company that we work for to have some like centralized view of a CRM where all of the information in it is highly, really locked down, and that that it looks the same, provides exactly the same view to everybody in the company? Sure, right? But that's like a view of the customer. Yeah. But is there also a need, for example, for Paul to look at that data, use that data, supplement that data with a whole bunch of unstructured stuff, right? That has got nothing to do with the core functionality of the tool, and that Paul can then use this standardized thing as an input to whatever crazy thing that Paul has built. So in your world, for example, if you start to think about that in terms of in let's say a clinical trial setting, right, and what the next generation of, say, phase 4 clinical trials, right, needs to look like, right?
Yeah.
Think of all of the messy data that is out there on drugs that are in market that could and would and should apply and be relevant to phase 4 trials, right?
Yeah.
That stuff doesn't have to be in a regulated system at the point at which we're initially interrogating it, because it's already out there in the world and we're just looking at it, right? It doesn't belong to us. We're just simply gathering a bit that's over here and gathering a bit that's over here and gathering a bit that's over here in order to be able to look at it. Now, once we've got a hypothesis and we want to do some research on it, then we might gather it into another highly specialized system that is highly locked down.
Yeah.
But there's so much stuff around it that contributes to that is a support system for the art of doing work versus the science of doing work.
Yeah.
It is currently sort of locked in to expensive applications that we buy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's we're in a really weird spot, and I think your timing is really interesting in that so much has happened in the last 5 to 6 weeks.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
That's different than it was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
I think that the problem that I'm seeing is the twofold. One is that there just isn't enough understanding of the overview.
Yeah.
In most organizations to see the general impact of things across the board. That's one, is that there's just not enough people with that purview. And the other piece is that it is being so oversold as the absolute solution when you don't have the generalists that can actually point it in the right direction. It's not going to be your solution.
So what is the it in this scenario?
AI.
Okay, like
just generally
the big
like
thing that is AI.
Oh yeah, we're gonna vibe code our way into not some ridiculous utopia where we have no vendors that we need to pay anymore, or we're gonna spin up giant applications that are going to stand up to scrutiny just because you can do that in Claude. And it's like, but you have to point it in the right direction and make it very targeted to be successful. Like each one of those agents has a job and it's really good at that job, but you had to figure out what that job was and make sure it knew how to do that job before you could turn it loose. And that is accelerated, but I don't know. I'm struggling to see how it goes from the individual benefits, which I can see if you know what you're doing, to whole organizations.
Well, I think one huge aspect of this, something that Garcia covers in that book, Understanding Nature's Blueprint. And I've read that. You and I have spoken about her book and on my pod. And that book has stuck with me, and I've read it. I've read it again. I think in many ways it was ahead of its time. And I think its time is sort of now. Reason that I say that is because I think that organizational structure and organizational design that is really centered around very outdated concepts of hierarchical organization that stem back to the scientific management methods that come out of the Industrial Revolution. I think all of that, like in a utopian world, as it were, you don't build it like that anymore. Right? You build these very, very dynamic organizations, and it comes back to the point that I was making about before. You are literally asking yourself the question: what belongs in a centralized database? What belongs in a structure that is highly standardized, and everything else is not highly standardized, and everything else morphs and subtly adjusts and flows as what the organization is doing changes, and as the needs of the organization change. I think you need a structure along the lines of what Ines points out in her book in order to truly enable what it is that we're talking about. And alongside that implies huge amounts of additional flexibility of how these organizations, these things come together. So, for example, like step one can be, what's the perfect system that fits me like a glove?
Right.
And then step two is like, who all else in this organization would get use out of the thing that I have built? And
Mm.
maybe they don't get the same. Maybe the user interface that they need to see is completely different to the user interface that I need to see. Maybe the way that maybe the underlying information architecture that I built in order to allow me to do my job is
Mm.
hugely appropriate for them. So you can imagine a situation where, like, oh man, I've got this thing that applies to my job. I throw it up on, an internal GitHub or something like that. Somebody else grabs it and forks it for the needs that they have in order to be able to do their work. And as that's happening, it's all of that information and all of that data and all of those approaches, those subtle approaches, are being held in a centralized repository. And then you've got a layer of AI that's sitting on top of that, interrogating that, and literally like spitting out suggestions for a new app that you could build here, or a new app that you could
Yeah.
build there, that work for this company. But in order for any of that to become to accomplish, right? Traditional hierarchies just don't
Yeah.
work in that type of scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought of something while you were talking about the product piece too, which is the reason you build a product is to solve a particular problem.
Yep.
And then the product becomes the problem.
Product becomes the problem. And oftentimes, by the way, the original program, I mean, this makes sense, right? Companies are built around products, right?
Yeah.
So any piece of software that you have is an evolution of a thing that was designed to solve a problem that existed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. The world has changed. That problem doesn't exist anymore, right? Or is wildly different to the problem. Built a bunch of technical debt into the solution that you've created, and they've stuck their tentacles into you, right? And created, every part of their problem now becomes your problem, right? And you wind up being held back by the very solutions that you're paying for. And this is not a criticism of the idea that software companies exist, right? But once you really start to think about it, you think that's kind of broken. Should it not be that the problems that we face inside at an individual level, a team level, an organizational level, that we're building the solutions to those problems, because then it's tightly aligned to the specific way in which we see the world. You can imagine a future where very small number of systems to create the order that you must create in order to meet the regulatory requirements of your industry, whatever. And very small, slim, standardized applications that do some common fundamental things, like everybody has an HR system. These very, and they're very simple, they're very small, they just do these things. And then anything that we do in terms of analyzing or interrogating or drawing conclusions from, or anytime we as a human would go, man, I wish I could get a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that, and then I get an insight. That belongs to us, but then it automatically morphs and changes. And that AI layer that I was talking about that sits on top, right, where everybody's throwing their stuff into a repository, their software solution into a repository, right? That AI layer should be smart enough to go, hey, business conditions have changed for you as an organization. I see a really interesting application over here and a really interesting application over here. I'm going to build an application that pulls together the best bits of that and the best bits of that, and presents it to you, so that you can now do something. Now do something amazing with it. And literally, the nature of the solutions that you're building as an organization morphing on a day-to-day or even an hour-to-hour basis as the circumstances base change. And it's it's like an octopus, man. It's like it's literally just it sees a small space and it changes its shape so it can fit through.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, and it's not. I don't think it's buying, 20 applications from big vendors and spending millions of dollars a year with them.
Yeah, it's tough because I'm trying to, if you back yourself out to uh like the risk of doing what we're doing with our information landscape.
Yeah.
I would argue that the risk is higher in not exploring where this can really help. It's a tough one because I'm just trying to get into the idea of the historical reasons why we've captured into systems that like we have is because we invented relational databases before we invented
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah. Basically.
And the standards that are set around what we need to keep, pay attention to, show as a result are all shifting under our feet.
Well, yeah, and we have to separate out, and this this takes a bit of a mental model shift. I think we have to separate out this thing that everybody's excited by, generative AI, that has challenges with hallucinations and all of these different, with the concept as to what it means to build and create.
Yeah.
So I can so so if you're casually thinking about this, you might go, well, hang on, right? Data is data, right? We want to be super confident that when we're interrogating the data, we're seeing what we need to see, and then that gets us down to certain types of architecture that you can build in order to make sure that you're not hallucinating and all of that. That's fundamentally not what I'm arguing here. What I'm saying is that due to how effective AI has become at coding and is only getting better and better. I think Anthropic said that 80% of code, I want to say 80% of their code is now written by AI.
It's crazy.
But anyway, we're getting to a point where software companies themselves, the products they themselves are building, are almost entirely built by AI. And so then at that point,
It's wild.
what you're talking about is building, literally, seeing a problem and building an application. And so what I think this will cause people, like I would love to be an enterprise architect, because if I was, I would be going back and I was one in the past. If I were going back and looking into systems, I would literally be reinventing the landscape, and I would be reinventing the landscape to center it around what must be fixed, and then everything else that does not have to be isn't. And then at that point, you can do all of the crazy stuff that I was. And that's a completely different mindset to the mindset that we would have had even 2 months ago, I think, or 3 months ago. Because back then, we would have said, we would have gone into traditional buy versus build, sunk costs, all of that kind of stuff, right? Versus saying to ourselves, if we can just get down to a bare minimum of the stuff that must be fixed, and then innovate the heck out of the rest of it, our costs will come down, but our ability to be able to do the morphing and the changing and be the high value stuff is goes through the roof, and we remain competitive.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's some caveats in there around trust in every organization having enough people who could figure this out for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like so there is a benefit. And the other piece that's interesting to me is that if you do have some of these, like, I mean, Salesforce is a good example, in life sciences, Viva, Salesforce, et cetera. There's a couple other players, but essentially, in theory, they should have more experience at these big scale problems than anyone.
Yeah.
So they should be able to solve them for everyone in a much more elegant way.
Yeah.
And they also, because we've been giving them all so much money for so long, they have the means to do that. What hasn't evolved, and what I think will need to evolve, and what I wish would happen, is that could switch from the traditional license, software usage, whatever, subscription to a hard-coded, unchanging thing, to an amorphous utility. And in life sciences especially, that means the regulators have to change the way they approach it. That means the software companies have to change the way they price it. That means the user groups have to adapt to a much more flexible workspace. That means the people that inspect our companies inspect them differently to figure out if we're doing what we're supposed to. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like,
I do.
all of this change has to happen for us to get these benefits. It doesn't change that it's available now and that we can start to use it. But I'm just looking at this like, wow, this is the first time there's been this much potential upheaval in this industry, maybe since Adobe Acrobat came out.
Maybe,
And not even then. It
or
wasn't even as big of a deal then, right? Like
maybe even
word
since,
processing.
maybe even since PCs arrived on the
Yeah, yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's like because PCs even hitting every desktop. I mean, we disrupted the typewriter.
Yeah. Well, they changed the paradigm, didn't
Then
they? In the
email.
sense that
Yeah.
they were a paradigm change, because before that there were computer
Mainframes and
rooms,
stuff. Yeah,
right? And if you had a problem you wanted to solve, you wander over to the computer room and you work with a computer engineer and punch cards, right? So
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
like, okay, I need this problem solving, input, output. It would take a long time to figure out how to configure the system to answer the questions that you had of the system, and that democratized. And this is what this is really a story about, right? It PC democratized the idea of being able to accomplish and do work as an individual on your desktop, and it basically went
Yeah.
from a sort of centralized control to a distributed. What's happening now is that the that's happening again. We are
Again.
at the very, very early stages of it, but it's happening again in the world of creating solutions, of building full-fledged solutions to problems that we have. So I'm with you. I think that I don't. By no means do I think that this means that every software company dead in the water. What I think it means is that every software company has got to figure out how to reinvent itself in a way that, if you are, we'll use Viva, right? So Viva has money, right? They understand the processes, and as well as anybody, theoretically, because there's so many customers that have dealt with these challenges in different ways, right? And they have, I'm sure, talented software engineers. And talented software engineers, even though enormous amounts of code are being written by AI, there's a mindset associated with being a software engineer that
Yeah.
is valuable, right, and allows them to be able to work on solutions. Where I think this is going ultimately is that we should be able to get to a point, and we should be able to do it relatively quickly, whereby the practitioners of uh, of the art and craft and science of their job, whatever their job happens to be, are using software in such a way that they never have to be trained on it again,
Yeah.
right? Because when you are trained on software, what that really means is that this software does something in a way that is not naturally intuitive to
Yeah.
you as an individual using it, and training is what gets you there, right? Now, in a world where literally, I don't know if do you remember Star Trek 4 when they go to Earth, and I think that was 4, and there's the one with the blue whale and stuff like that. I think it is. Anyway, in Star Trek 4, there's this famous bit where um, it's set in present day when Star Trek was when that movie was made,
Yeah.
and there's a computer, and Scotty's trying to talk to the computer, blah blah blah, right? And then I think it's Bones or whatever points to the mouse, and he picks up the mouse and starts talking to the mouse like it's a microphone. But the point was, to me, what that point represented was the idea that it was not even within Scotty's comprehension that you wouldn't just like
Talk
ask the
to it.
computer for help and it would
Yeah.
it would give it, right? And in other words, that you should be able to as naturalistically you should be able to do anything in an organization as naturalistically as you and I are interacting right now. And the
Yeah.
fact and so that's what the Vivas of the world can use all of their skill and all of their expertise to do. And that should mean that even though you've got 2 or 3 or 4 people in a team that are theoretically doing the same job, minds work different ways, they're effective, they're efficient in different ways. And so they would just simply interact with the system in the way that was most naturalistic to them. And the system would have an amorphous layer that is the human layer that would naturally adjust to the way in which they work and would help them enhance the way in which they work, help them organize their day. It would help them be better at the act of working, right? Viva knows all about, if it's done its job, it knows all about how the whole spectrum of people that do the job that people who interact with Viva do, and so they should be able to use that to build a highly sophisticated, self-forming version of AI that uses standardized stuff at the bottom and creates that highly naturalistic role for the other things. So it's almost like you go from being a product company to a roles company, right? So
Yeah.
you're like, okay, we target this role and this role and this role and this role in an organization, and we are the software enablement layer for these roles of that organization because we know those roles better than anybody else. So we can do it much better than a personal, than a generalized bit of software would be able to do.
Yeah.
That's highly valuable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and so, but you got to get the business model right to be able to sell that way, and you've got to get people's heads away from this idea of the world needs another product.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the way it gets productized and then gets priced also ends up
Yes.
being like, okay, I'm sure you've seen some of the most recent pieces where somebody deployed an AI and accidentally they spent $1.5 million in tokens in a month. It's just like, okay, well, that's not sustainable. So, it is infancy, but it's going so fast, and if you're watching it, it just feels so overwhelming almost that there's so many options.
I do not know what the answer to that is. You and I have had a discussion before as to whether that means we lean into tokens more. To me, we're caught in this like ugly middle ground right now where none of it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Where we're paying traditional subscriptions, and we're paying for tokens on top, and occasionally we've got traditional software licensing happening on top of that. To me, you go all one way or all the other way. I personally buy into the idea, as I've mentioned to you before, of the idea of like everything's a token, right? Because then at least it has some. It becomes like electricity, right? Need more of it. If if everybody leaves the light on at night, right, you should pay more for electricity. And I think that it's sort of related to that. Now, separate from that is the question as to if we are moving into a world where all of this processing remains in the data center, right, and we're building all of these additional data centers, then we almost certainly need to upgrade the fabric that connects those things. We need to upgrade we need an internet that's fit for purpose for this. And or if you saw the announcement from with Dell and I think Dell and Microsoft and Nvidia and maybe even, but anyway, the Nvidia chips that are going to appear in our computer, that points us to an interesting direction. We might be at a point where we're going to say, hey, look at all this unused processing power on people's physical machines, and I can run local models for a huge proportion of it, and then only go off and into the cloud for the other stuff. And that might be what brings our token cost down. We might be moving into a world where we've got super expensive workstations once more. They're doing like most of the AI stuff, and then they're going off to the data center to grab a bit more power if they, as and when they need it. That could happen. I don't know, but whatever does happen, we're seeing the reflection of the fact that almost every aspect of how work is structured and how work is done is not fit for purpose. Everything from technology infrastructure through organizational infrastructure, through information infrastructure, all of it is not fit for purpose for where the puck is going.
What's available now? Yeah.
And so to me that represents it's the one thing, when I don't know about you, Matt, but I go from I wake up in the morning and some days I'm like, oh man, we're all screwed, everybody's going to be out of a job, and then the next thing I think is like, wow, if you look at how suboptimal all of this is, and how much change we need to go through in order for it to be optimal, then I think, oh man, that's a lot of work for a lot of people.
I agree.
But it's very different work to what we've done.
It's very different. It's shifted around us. It's very interesting. So I want to spend just a few more minutes before we go on your book, The AI Ready Human, for folks who haven't read it, or is this the first time they're tuning into the podcast and getting to meet Paul? I just want to talk about your book and how you see it not only fitting right now, given what we just talked about, which is everything's changing, and what you're doing around that book, because we talked about you're going to probably have to update it on a regular basis, So how's that fit into the conversation, and what have you found you got right, and what are you looking at changing?
So when you write a book about AI, it's such a challenge because literally be out of date before you hit
before it prints,
right? Before it prints. So when I was putting this together, I wanted to create something that was more evergreen, and I think I largely accomplished that. The thought process that I went through came from startup that I was the founder of, and startup was centered around giving people the skills they needed to thrive as work evolved. And what I found during my process of running that organization and working with 1,000 programs is that there's this ever-changing thing, environment that we live in, the challenges that we face, the competition, all of that kind of stuff is changing very, very rapidly. But then there's this evergreen thing, or the thing that moves not at the pace of that,
right?
Which is the human beings and the biological systems that are the human beings.
Yeah.
And those, and there are some more kind of, I feel like, universal considerations associated with the human beings that are. I wanted to focus on that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to focus on, ooh, look, this is coming, this is coming, and this is
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like everything else would be wrong, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's been some wild in our conversation right now. There's been some wild speculation, right? I don't like. I think that's where it's going. I think that the organizations need to be more biological in nature, and I think that we need to be much more flexible. And I think that the companies will respond to this by behaving in the way that they will. But those are like some new technology innovation could happen literally tomorrow that would change everything that I just said.
Yeah.
Right. So as a result of that, it just didn't make any sense to focus on that. So I wanted to focus on on how the human being can be ready for rapidly changing environments and how they can thrive in those rapidly changing environments.
Yeah.
That ultimately is what the book is about. The last word of it, the human word of it, is the most important part of the overall equation. So in that sense, it's pretty universal. Now, over the next several months, I will update it again, and I'm sure I'll update it again next year and the year after. But the fundamental messaging is the same.
Yeah.
And I would actually say, and you'll know this because you've read it, but I mean, the way that I'm going to do the updates to it will be that that even if there are 5 versions of it, it will actually be useful for people to actually have all five, right? Because it's a because it will help people, I think, to understand where we're coming from and understand the backdrop, and also understand how little has changed. Right, as we get as in the new version that I've been working on of it, the only thing that has really changed is that some of the ways in which we consider organizational dynamics and team dynamics and the environment in which you work is a bit different.
Yeah.
And also, what's a bit different is the way in which you can structure the AI that you're interacting with in order to meet your needs better.
Yeah.
That's it, really.
Yeah, I was going to say that the way your book is laid out is so brilliant because you have the human part, the description, and then you have an exercise kind of thing where you can learn it. And I was going to say the thing that'll probably change the most is what the exercises can do in the show, right? But the philosophy pages are so good and so universal that that's why I was really curious, like, what is he going to update? Like, you can update because the models are changing, but the lesson you're trying to learn as a human is exactly the same for the most part. So it's very fascinating.
I kind of wish I had a version 0 where all the lessons were on paper.
Yeah.
Or the exercises, right? Because that would be. I think you're exactly right. I mean, that's exactly sort of the direction that I'm going on. But then I also have to be careful, which is that, you and I spoke about this a little bit before we started recording, right? Which is that this book is designed and does, I believe, based on the feedback that I've got, meets you where you're at.
Yeah.
So it's the whole idea that, if a push up against the wall is hard, then it's valuable to you. Right. And so the goal of the book was to be like, if all you can do is a push up against the wall, as in you've pretty much never seen AI, you've never, you've never gone beyond hearing about AI in the discourse and into logging into ChatGPT, we're there for you.
Good
but
start.
On the other hand, simultaneously, if you have been like right at the bleeding edge of this, and now you've got like teams of agents and all that kind of stuff, it should, at least in theory, still be valuable to you because it's encouraging you to pull back and go, okay, you know what? Is my relationship with AI healthy, for example? right? Is am I
Yeah. Yeah.
am I spending enough time away from AI? What is AI doing to change my brain? Right?
Yeah.
These are some of the things that we're that we look at in the book, and so that will also be some of the other stuff that we that I include as and when I get the update done, which is to say, I some of the stuff that we talk about in the book, there's a lot more evidence for now in terms of what it's doing to our brains, how it's changing how we think,
Right.
and how it's changing the mindset that we need to use, and also how different people in different types of roles um, think about AI and interact with AI. So my new role at Adobe, for example, I spend a ton of time with creatives, and they kind of think about AI a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I've come up with a model that is not in the book, and that I rather like, which is there's this. You think about how AI, what AI is to people, right? Um, there's really three things that AI is to the people that interact with it. There's AI as productivity enhancer. There's AI as quality improver. And then there's a third, which is particularly relevant for creatives, which is AI as medium. In other words, am I creating something fresh or new that could not have been created without AI, right? And so AI as medium, you and I have spoken in the past about like things like ways in which, say, Peter Jackson uses AI. The Beatles song Now and Then, for example, impossible to create without AI. But then also, like, there's some artists like surrealists, for example, modern day surrealists who were like, oh, I can create a short video that would have been impossible for me to create with anything other than AI. And so it's like this sort of new sort of art forms and new ways of doing things and new types of media that we can create and all that kind of stuff with AI. Most of the time, we just think of that right now as in the negative in terms of the slop. But you can flip that, you can invert that, and you can say, okay, AI can do a poor job of mimicking things that humans would do, but it might do a really good job of creating things that humans cannot do, right? And then the humans that guide that allow us to be able to do different things. So those three categories, for example, are categories that we didn't really think of and will make its way into the next book.
Very good. Well, that's a good place to stop. I think we could talk for many, many hours, and we already have for many, many hours about these topics over on Humanity Working. So, Paul, I really appreciate your time, and I think this is really relevant right now with the changing of these systems around us in my space for sure. So,
cheers, Matt. I hope we weren't too esoteric, but
nah, it's good.
Yeah.
Good catching up. Talk to you soon, Paul. Thanks.
Bye.